While Hurricane Katrina changed the Gulf Coast of this country 10 years ago, no single city was hit harder or represents the horror of the storm that was brought on this country than New Orleans. And no city suffered more for the failures of government before and after Katrina hit. 80% of the city flooded, and roughly half of the city was displaced. We're joined now by New Orleans Mayor, Democrat Mitch Landrieu. Mayor, I want to ask you about the levees. They broke.
Good morning.
10 years ago. Are they safe now?
Yes, and much safer. But the first thing for the country to continue to remember is this was an infrastructure failure. This was not a natural disaster. And one of the things that is essential is that we make sure that we secure the infrastructure in the country, particularly the levees. The levees are much stronger than they were before, but we still believe that we need to get to 500-year protection rather than 100. But it's much better. As the governor said just a minute ago, we have to continue to rebuild the coast. We've got to make sure the levees are strong. And then internally in the city, as we rebuild structurally, they have to be strong as well.
But I've heard you say before they're only capable of stopping a Category 3 hurricane and not a 5, so they're not strong enough.
Well, no, let me say this. First of all, if a Category 5 hits any major American city, much like you saw with Sandy in the Northeast or you're going to see in Miami, we're going to be in very difficult situations. But right now, the levee system here is much stronger than it should be. We've had hurricanes from the beginning of our 300-year history. The point is to be better prepared, to be more resilient, and to be stronger. We're stronger today than we were before Katrina, but you can't ever guarantee that you're not going to get hurt again.
What have you learned in the rebuilding? I mean, in a sense, New Orleans has had a clean slate on some of the issues of poverty, of education, of rebuilding. What have you learned that other cities might be able to take from your experience?
Well, listen, that's a great point, because New Orleans is either one of two things: the nation's canary in the coal mine. Everything that's happening down here on the negative side is actually reflected in every other city in America, and everything that's happening on the positive side here can make sure that the city of New Orleans, this nation's most immediate laboratory for innovation and change. When you have a tragic circumstance like we have, what we've learned is don't put it back just like it was. Really take the time to dig down deep and to make the institutional changes that are necessary to give the city a better chance going forward. So, for example, we've completely restructured our education system, so now our kids have a much better opportunity. Our graduation rates are higher, our dropout rates are lower. The achievement gap between the kids in the inner city and the kids outside of the city is closed. We've completely restructured our healthcare delivery system, and we're completely changing our infrastructure. So the challenge is to go ahead and take the responsibility to build it back the way that you want it to always be, not just the way it was before the storm.
You've also taken on an issue that was there before the storm, what you've called the epidemic of violence in your city. We've talked a lot about cities and the conflict between the community and the police. What have you learned in New Orleans about about that issue?
Well, first of all, again, I think New Orleans reflects the rest of the country. When you see all of the upset on the streets of all of the cities of America surrounding the relationship between African Americans and the police, that's real. We have it here, we have it everywhere, and we need to address that. But one of the things I've specifically spoken about, which I think is a national epidemic that in my opinion is morally reprehensible, is the lives of young African American men that are taken at such high rates from gun violence across America. And I just believe it's an epidemic, and I think it's a moral failure of our country. So we've talked about that a lot, and there is an ecosystem of violence that is developed in neighborhoods around this country that make us feel unsafe, that give people no hope, and I think that's a real problem. So we've got to work on that too. But that's just not a criminal justice police response problem. That's early childhood education, that's better families, it's better communities, it's people learning how to work together and resolve differences. It's about mental health, it's about substance abuse, it's about a bucket load of stuff, and it's symptomatic of what I think is a much larger problem in the country, which is what we have to deal with going forward, and we're going to keep working on that in New Orleans.
All right, Governor Mitch Landrieu in New Orleans, thanks so much for being with us.